history. So he came to be called America's Plato because he was our sort of first homegrown philosopher. But I think of him as America's Shankaracharya, because if you read Emerson and you understand the English of his day, he's Advaita Vedanta. Closer to the mic. I have to lean in, okay. He was expressing Advaita Vedanta in the 19th century English of American prose. And it's not an accident, because he was absorbing Vedantic ideas through the Gita and other texts that he wrote, and his own intuitive insights into the way things are. He gave his copy of the Gita to Thoreau when Thoreau famously spent his sojourn on the pond in Walden and wrote his famous text, Walden, which almost every American high school or college student reads at one point. And in it, he calls himself a yogi. And I always like to reflect on the fact that within a 10-mile radius of Walden Pond in Massachusetts, now there's probably 200 yoga studios, or 100 or whatever. There weren't any then. There were no gurus then. There was nothing except books. But he saw something and called himself a yogi. And he wrote about reading the Gita every morning, and what a sublime text it was, and how important it was in his own thinking. Millions of American young people read that, and they get inspired, and they go and find a copy of the Gita themselves, and for many of them, that's the beginning of a new way of looking at the world and a new spirituality. That has been going on now for more than 150 years. But there's this little interaction that I was reminded of when I was in Ahmedabad the other day and went to the Gandhi ashram. India influenced Henry David Thoreau through the Gita. Thoreau influenced Gandhi through his work in the ideas of nonviolent protest and civil disobedience. And Gandhi, in turn, these are 3 Time magazine covers from the 1930s. Gandhi's voice in the world and his presence in the world was one of those factors that got Americans to start thinking India wasn't just some backward country in Asia, but had something of importance in the world and something to pay attention to. And Gandhi went on to influence a lot of Americans, most especially Martin Luther King, who is pictured here, arriving in India in 1959 on a sort of pilgrimage to Gandhi's ashrams and to explore further Gandhi's work. And he would then put that into action in his civil rights campaign to end racism in America. So we have had a fruitful relationship through these sort of giants of history. But there's much more to it than that. We all know what India has adopted from America. It's obvious on the streets. We invented automobiles. You have traffic jams. And ever since I got here, I've been thinking, we should have left the horns out of the cars when we sent them to India. We invented, movie technology. You have Bollywood, and now Bollywood dance and music is popular with young Americans in nightclubs, and television, and cell phones, and all those technological advances that America instigated and gave to the world. We won't mention some of the other things that are not worthy of your adopting, but ever since I got here, and people have said, oh, our young people, they're turning to America, and I thought, oh my God, I hope they don't adopt the wrong things, you know. Cell phones are good, Coca-Cola is not, and fast food and all that junk. Be discerning about what you borrow from America. But those gifts of America to the world, those technological advances, the machinery of material progress, that has genuinely helped many countries, and I'm sure India. What we've gotten in return from India is far less visible. It's the life of the spirit. It's knowledge and technologies that transform inner life, that affect the mind and the heart and the soul. It's not so visible. Yoga asanas are visible. And they're so visible now in America, you can't see a magazine without some pictures of people doing asanas, or look at a TV commercial. But what the real value of what India gave us is in the realm of knowledge and ideas and practical mind and body technologies of yoga. And what mainly came to America of all the great diverse multifaceted teachings of Sanatana Dharma was the central ideas of Vedanta, primarily the sort of modern Vedanta that Swami Vivekananda articulated so well and gave to set the template for that sort of transmission from India to the West. And the practical methodologies of yoga. That combination is primarily what we've absorbed from the Vedic tradition. And now, and I'll get to this later, now we're starting to appreciate some of the other aspects of the Dharma that most Americans would not have been ready to accept 100 years ago or even 50 years ago. But now things are changing and we know a lot and we want to know more. That transmission and the eagerness with which certain Americans embraced Vedanta and yoga, and over time were in turn transmitted to other Americans, eventually started to have a transformative effect on American life. It has changed the discipline of psychology in a significant way. It has changed medicine, healthcare modalities. It has changed even the way some of our theoretical physicists look at the world and the universe. It has changed the way the sort of leaders in the field of how to improve your life. We have a huge self-help industry in America. And most of the leading figures in that have, back in the 60s and 70s when the interest in India exploded, and people of my generation were going to see gurus and coming to ashrams, most of the leaders in that field have absorbed to some degree or another ideas from Vedanta and methods of yoga, and they translate it into the language of self-improvement and remove the sort of religious overtones that could be read into it if they use Sanskrit or any giveaways. And those ideas filter in through people who just want advice about how to have a happier life or lose weight or have a more successful business. But mostly it has changed how Americans understand religion and what religion can be. Not what religion is, but what religion can be, and what it means to have a deep and authentic spiritual life. This has been a radical shift. A few years ago, as I was finishing American Veda and trying to cut it down to a mere 350 pages, an article was published in Newsweek magazine, written by the religion editor. Newsweek then was the most important weekly news magazine in the country. And the headline of that article was, "We are all Hindus now." You can imagine what that title, how people reacted to that title. It was a lot of fun, actually, to see the reactions to it. And the first line of the article was even more provocative because it said, "America is not a Christian nation." And that came as a shock to certain American faction of Americans who not only want America to be a Christian nation, but want the world to be a Christian world. And not just any Christian world, their form of Christian world, not that church's Christian world, but our form of Christian. And we have those people in America, as you know, because they're funding people here doing horrible things in the name of missionary work. And I'm conscious of the fact that this is being videotaped. and that I could start, if this gets on YouTube or something, I could get even more angry emails, but I don't care because the stories I hear just make me very upset. And we could talk more about that later. But anyway, the point is that it came as a, what does she mean we are all Hindus now? Well, what she didn't mean was that massive numbers of Americans were going to stop going to church and synagogue and go to mandirs instead. She didn't mean that Christians were going to tear down their statues of Jesus and rip the crosses off their neck and replace them with murtis and medallions of Ganesha or something. They weren't going to start doing pujas in their home instead of praying in their usual way. What she meant was, in the first sentence, the second sentence, recent poll data show that conceptually, we are slowly becoming more like Hindus and less like traditional Christians in the ways we think about God, ourselves, each other, and eternity. Now, that was very perceptive of that editor. I just spent a few years researching and writing American Veda, and I had come to a similar conclusion. And in fact, I had even a lot more data than she did. But she saw the scientific evidence, because in America we do surveys every once in a while about how people feel about religion and spirituality and how they practice their spirituality, what their values are in that realm. And if you look at the body of data, and I investigated it because I wanted to make sure my sense that this America was changing in this way, I could back up with facts. I saw trends over the course of 20, 30, 40 years. And it shows that in spirit, Americans philosophically, theologically, have become a nation of Vedantins, in a sense. That includes millions of people who had never heard the word Vedanta in their lives. I gave a talk at one of the conferences celebrating Vivekananda's 150th birth celebration, and I said there's millions of Americans who have been powerfully affected by Vivekananda and his legacy who never heard of him. They don't even know who he was. They don't know what Vedanta is. They've never heard, the Mahavakyas that is part of your DNA, but they've heard it translated into ordinary English by a psychologist or a professor or a scholar or someone on television or Oprah Winfrey or, Dr. So-and-so. And the ideas ring true, and it's started to change them. And in practice, you can see we're becoming a nation of yogis. There's 20 million people a year in America who take yoga classes, which usually means just, asanas and, little pranayama. But I don't mean just them. There's another 40 or 50 million estimated people who have some kind of meditation practice. Many of those people are not practicing a form that is directly Hindu or Buddhist. It may be very secular form, but they wouldn't even have the idea of sitting down in something called meditation if it weren't for the teachings and teachers who came to us from India. It was just not part of the American spiritual language until the last few decades. This is a kind of summary of